Can you say something about releasing negative thought in your life? Can you give me some help with that? With thought patterns.
The thing about it is that first we would like to say it's a gradual thing, and so don't try to make it happen all at once. Next, we want to say that you can't not think about something, because when you're decided not to think about it, you're thinking about the thing you've decided not to think about. So the key is to think about something else. And you said it to us wisely. Is there some aspect of your body that you could focus upon? And we said Esther focused upon her breathing. So if you pick something that isn't loaded with something negative, the very best example that we have of this, early on in Esther's experience with us, she was allowing people to call on the telephone and have conversations with Abraham. And one day a woman called and couldn't hear anything that we were saying. She was asking very strong questions, but she could not hear our answers because she was all wadded up in the uncomfortable details of her life. So nothing that we said gave her any relief or any belief that things would get better. So we said to her, let's talk about something else. And she said, like what? And we said, let's talk about blue glass. And she said, whatever for? And we said, because you don't have any strong opinions about blue glass, and it can be a clearing experience for you. It just annoyed her that we wanted to talk about something that was not her problem. So we described blue glass. We talked about how many different ways glass is blue. Some of you can see through, some of you can't, different shades of blue, until she couldn't take it anymore. And then we said, let's talk about butterflies. Well, that didn't interest her either. Why in the world would I like to talk about butterflies? We wanted to talk about butterflies with her because it was something that she didn't think about, that she didn't have any negative conversation going on in her own mind, that she didn't have any patterns of thought that were detrimental. Then we said, let's talk about feathers. And so by the time we had finished this brief conversation on these subjects, she was totally annoyed. She hung up, not understanding what we were getting at. And Esther and Jerry went about their day. So they were in San Diego, and they went over to their favorite restaurant in La Jolla to have lunch. And when they got out of the car, Esther said, we've got to go in this shop. And Jerry said, why? And Esther looked at him like, are you kidding? It's a shop. So he followed her in. She went into the shop, deep into the shop, and found a wall, a complete wall of blue glass, unlike anything that she'd ever seen. Now, Esther didn't want any blue glass. She was not interested in blue glass. She didn't even make the association about why she was seeing blue glass. And then they went off and had lunch. They left George's and walked down to the cove, the most beautiful place, in their opinion, where the land meets the sea. And as they're walking across this large grassy area, a flurry of butterflies so intense surrounded them that they had to stop talking in order to not eat them. So they made their way through the butterflies, and Esther is still not making any association with what had been activated in her an hour earlier. And then a little boy came across the way, very little boy, barely walking really, and he looked like he was coming right to them. And Jerry said, he looks like he knows you. And Esther looked at him, and he walked right up to Esther and handed her a feather. And in that moment, Esther realized that within a couple of hours of these three things being activated in the ethers, that because she had no resistance to any of them, they all manifested in her experience. So that's the point of meditation. That's the point of not trying to take a negative thought and turning it into a positive thought. That doesn't work for you. You have to take a non-thought and let the things that you want flow in on the wings of the non-thought. Now, of course, it's wonderful. If you can turn a non-thought in time, let's call it an unconditional thought, if you can turn it into a positive thought that gains momentum, then, that's when the real fun begins. In other words, we don't want you meditating your life away. We don't want you in a state of non-thought. We would far rather see you in a state of appreciation than in a state of meditation, because in either case, there's no resistance. And in appreciation, your object of attention is experiencing your flow, and you are having a better experience in appreciation than you will ever have in meditation, because you are here focused, and all that you are connecting with while you are meditating is now still with you, flowing through you towards your object of attention. Appreciation is way better than meditation. But if meditation gets you to that, then that's a really good path of least resistance, isn't it? Yes.
Thank you.
Best conversation we've had about any of that.
Abraham. I've been watching you for years. First time at an event. This is crazy. Good crazy. Okay, my question is this. I think I'm pretty secure in my spirituality.
Because I feel good most of the time.
Yes, yes.
And that's my evidence.
I'm going to just get to the point. Negative thought. It's really, really hard to deal with sometimes because, things happen.
Well, when it's hard, don't try, because you just make it worse. Just think in terms of momentum. And when you focus on something, you're adding momentum to it. And the more momentum you add, then the bigger it gets and the more difficult it is. If you just keep remembering that you being in the receptive mode is the goal, because all the other work's done. Step 1 is done, step 2 is done, step 3 is to get into the receptive mode. So once you accept that receptive mode is the goal and you're in the middle of a negative thought, well, it's unlikely, if the momentum is strong, like you are describing here, it's unlikely that you're going to get to the receptive mode easily. So why not let it go until it just sort of subsides, and then you can pick it up when it's easier.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was driving to see my brother. Like I said, been doing a lot of spiritual work.
So before you go further,
Yeah.
We'd like to understand a little bit about the momentum with your brother. How do you get along with your brother?
Oh, great.
Yeah, so getting ready to be ready, going to see your brother.
Right.
Good momentum there.
Good
And then-
momentum. But I was just consciously wanting to be aware of, I call it the little guy on my shoulder putting negative thoughts or showing me past negatives.
That little guy got really manifested, didn't he? You turned that little thought form into something even bigger, didn't you? Has he got a pitchfork? We're playing with you a little bit. Don't make him real. All that little guy is just momentum from thoughts that are not pleasing you. In other words, we wouldn't give him the time of day like that. So what you might want to say now, because you're all tuned in, tapped in, turned on, is I wanted to be aware of my thoughts that day. I wanted to have positive momentum going into the rendezvous with my brother. And feel the difference. Doesn't that promote a different momentum than I want to keep this little guy, this whispering things that aren't helpful to me, out of the way? Did he light up for all of you?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's out of my.
It's out of your control.
It seems out of my control.
Well, it really kind of is in that moment, because you're at the bottom of the hill. The momentum's too great. Just get out of the way, because there's not anything that you're going to really do to fix it right then, that red hot minute. But what we want to hear from you maybe is what was going on before that thought was so big that it was out of your control. In other words, it didn't just all of a sudden, you weren't just bipping along living happily ever after, and all of a sudden, boom, there he is. That's the way they show it in the movies, but that's not the way it is. That's not the way law of attraction produces it in your picture.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess over, I'll just sum it up. In the last probably few years, I've experienced some traumatic things that happened in my life. And I feel like because I was on that spiritual journey, I was able to deal with it a lot better than probably say most. But I still had to deal with it.
Do you think being on your way to see your brother was part of what activated that a little bit? Does he have memory of what you've been through?
Oh, yeah.
And so was it likely that there might be a conversation about some of that? Because you see, this ready to be ready to be ready to be ready to be ready. You've kind of followed that thought? So ready to be ready is ready for the receptive mode, whatever the receptive mode is. So maybe being on your way to see your brother got you sort of ready to be ready for what you might talk about with him, got you feeling a little bit about what you'd come through, made you feel a little defensive or justifying. Something started that trend of thought. And all we're saying is, at the time that it first began, that's when you want to deal with it. And if you didn't deal with it, and that's all right, don't worry, it'll get bigger, but it'll get bigger to the point that you can't deal with it in that moment. So what happens when it gets bigger and you can't deal with it in this moment? The contrast throws more into the vortex. So now the vortex is calling you in a stronger way. You're less likely in that moment to be able to go, but later like after meditation or when you first wake up in the morning or something, there'll be another opportunity and another and another and another. There's a little theme going on, and it's a human theme that goes something like, I'm doing really good, and I'd like to explain to you how much I've overcome. And that explaining what you've overcome takes you right back in it so that you're not overcoming it, you're reliving it again a little bit. And that comes from feeling a need to explain to somebody else why you're where you are, which usually happens when you're on your way to see your brother or anybody that knows you. Because most of you, we love you so much, but we have to give this to you. Most of you see yourself through the eyes of others. And therefore, you feel a need to contour their view of you. So you've got your nose in somebody else's business. You've got your nose in the business of what they think of you. And that's not your business. What they think of you is not your business because you can't control what they think of you. You don't know how hard they're trying to stay in the receiving mode. They're just remembering all the bad stuff that went down earlier. It's like looking through a photo album of your life to visit your brother or anybody. So you've got to come into a place of really not needing to influence their opinion of you, because that just activates something that no longer even is. And you know what the most wonderful thing is? All that stuff that you kind of want to talk about and that we really don't want to talk about for this reason, all that stuff you've lived has culminated in what you are. And wow, what you are and what's in your vortex, there's so much there. And that walk down memory lane is far less satisfying and has far more potential of activating stuff that just slows you down and slows you down and slows you down. You've been listening to us for a while. So when you hear us say, when you know what you don't want, you know what you do want, and that rocket of desire goes into your vortex. Now that was a very quiet and disproportionate in terms to the importance of it delivery there. What we mean to say is all of the important and delicious components of your life, every one of them has unleashed a stream of becoming that your inner being revels in every day. Oh, look what his life has produced for him and all of us. And then that stream of thought that you keep amending with each argument or each misunderstanding or each whatever you're doing as you're going through the contrast of life, each stream of that just makes this bigger, richer, more beautiful palette of creation that's in the process of becoming. And your inner being revels in every bit of it and only feels love and praise and appreciation for everything you lived that created that. And now your inner being wants to say to you, it's time for this to be what you focus on. That served you and went over here. Focus here now, not over there. So, now there are a couple of reasons that we think that's a good idea. Here's the biggest one. That's the only place your inner being's looking, and when you look where your inner being doesn't look, you don't feel good. That could be reason enough. Your inner being isn't looking back because your inner being has no reason to justify the magnificence that you are by the contrast that you lived. Because your inner being does not wish to insert more contrast into your now about stuff you already know. Isn't that nice?